Welcome to Agora by Give Something Back to Berlin. In this podcast series, we'll be finding out how migration has changed our urban landscape and exchange ideas with those who are making a difference. Join us while we tackle issues ranging from human rights and diversity to migrant identity and belonging.
Hello and welcome back to Agora. My name is Marie, I'm your host for today's episode, and I am joined by Hans Kalben, who is a social worker and team lead at the refugee department with Schwulenberatung Berlin. It's lovely that you're joining us today.
Hi Marie.
So when and why did you start offering services for LGBTIQ plus refugees in Berlin?
So I've been working for Schwulenberatung already for the last 10 years and working mainly with gay men with psychiatric challenges before. And Schwulenberatung is offering a lot of diverse services to LGBTI people. But up until the year 2015, we didn't have a specialized service that was directed to refugees. And we noticed more and more people coming to our other services and had to realize that we were not very well equipped to address those requests because there was language-wise but also different laws that were relevant for those people, that we needed to think of something more specialized.
What specific problems do LGBTIQ plus refugees face in Berlin, and how do you help them address those?
Yes, there's a lot. It starts with housing. Refugees who come to Germany are by law obliged to live in official refugee camps or shelters, and those shelters are not known to be very LGBTI friendly places. So, and this is really how things escalated a bit for us in the year 2015, as more and more people came to us reporting that they were experiencing discrimination, violence, and many bad things in the actual refugee camps. So that is one major thing, the housing, and then there is psychological needs for trans people. It can be about hormones, or there's just so many needs that other people have and that also other LGBT people have, but then in the combination of trauma, different language needs and all that, it can be difficult even in a city as Berlin to just find your way and find the places that could address all those needs.
So we're talking about the very specific needs of people of this community. What is specific about counseling these people?
What is specific? I think one major thing that comes to mind is that LGBTI people, or queer people, if we want to have like a broader term, often had as a strategy for survival, keep everything within and keep everything hidden about all these subjects, about gender identity, sexual orientation, and suddenly, be it in counseling or be it in the asylum interviews, they are asked to reveal all that. All of a sudden, it's very important to come out with all these things, and that can be a big challenge for people to make that jump all of a sudden. And of course, the language is a challenge for us to have sensitive language translators helping us in our work. And also a specific thing that I would say is, compared to other refugees, for queer refugees, could also be that often these people cannot rely as much on family networks and community networks from their own countries of origin. Often they had to run from that as well, unfortunately.
So you've already mentioned the question of language barriers and language problems. This is a thing that can keep refugees from making use of support systems and counseling services. How do you help queer refugees address this issue?
I think from the very start our idea was that we needed to have both. people who know Schwulenberatung, our organization, and the infrastructure of the city of Berlin, the German systems, healthcare, legal systems, and all that, but also people who could understand what it means to be a refugee from their own experience, and people who speak the languages themselves. So our team already itself is organized in a way that we have both in the team. We have people who have known the Berlin infrastructure, and we have people who are migrants or refugees themselves and bring certain skills and knowledge and empathetic approaches with them by means of their own biographies. So already in our team we speak a lot of languages ourselves, and we have also from the beginning built up, let's say, a pool of translators, first working voluntarily, then for a little money, then later some of the translators could even get a full-time employment in the NGO. So this is how we do our work. So whenever we don't speak the language, we have translators who mostly are queer people themselves who help us doing our work.
So that they can be sensitive of the topics, but also of the vocabulary in general. Which
Exactly.
So you already spoke, you mentioned earlier that you offer a wide range of services. Can you maybe tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, Schwulenberatung itself over the years has developed all sorts of services like coming out groups and STI checkings and psychological counselings and assisted living and all these things. So, like I said, the refugee department kind of came last on top, and it's still a challenge for us sometimes to actually open up all these other specialized services to queer refugees, because not everywhere is the same language skills and knowledge of the legal situation. So we are still in that. It's a long process because we want to enable queer refugees to not only have to rely to our refugee specialized services, but to be empowered to just use whatever other service that they would like in the same way. But that's still a work in progress.
A big issue is also mental health, obviously, and in general it's really difficult sometimes to get access to mental health support in Berlin, and that can put especially vulnerable people at risk, because if you don't, what you were saying, if you don't really know the structures, it's harder to get access to these things. And so what steps do you think need to be taken to provide help, especially for queer refugees?
That's such a major subject, and I must admit, we're doing this work now for the last 7 years nearly, and still we don't have a lot of success in helping queer refugees into the general system of psychotherapy and all that. So there is a shortage of freely available psychotherapy in general already, and in addition to that you need like a specialized empathetic approach and skill and knowledge to also work with, let's say, trans people or non-binary people or even gay people, and also have the extra hurdle of the language gap. This makes it nearly impossible. Most people don't manage to ever access that system. So a good thing that we had from the beginning is that we have psychologists working within our project. So there it's easy, you don't need health insurance, you don't need all these hurdles to overcome them, so that at least we can offer like a stabilizing psychological support. And recently we have also managed to secure some financing to also prospectively offer psychotherapy as well within the NGO. But all of that is still just very tiny. What is available or increasingly becoming available, thankfully, is still tiny in comparison to the demand, which is so big. So I think there need to be the bureaucratic challenges need to be lowered a lot still. It needs to be easy also for doctors and therapists to offer their services and easily have translation available and not shy away from, oh my God, it's already so complicated now. Why should I take this patient if I have all this extra work to do in advance? So that needs to become easier. And I think we need more freely available services in Berlin in general. The bureaucracy on that front is very, very huge. To even just for new therapists even to work independently and get a seat with the health insurance systems and all that. And also what kind of therapy is even recognized by the health insurances, all that I think is a long way to go still.
I mean, especially for queer refugees, obviously there are so many levels of mental health issues that they have to struggle with: identity, racism, discrimination, also, and then just what you were addressing, like the bureaucratic hurdles that come on top of all of this. And a thing that has affected all of us in the last couple of years has been the pandemic, obviously. How has mental health been affected in your mind generally by the pandemic? And do you have any tips how to help those that are suffering from anxiety, for example, due to the pandemic?
Wow, it's a big question.
It's a big question again, yeah.
And I would say it's a bit like, I mean, I also don't want to... it's not that queer refugees are like one group where everybody has similar needs, you know? Same like with everybody else. So I have seen in my own circle of friends, and I see it with our clients too, there are some people who are handling the pandemic situation pretty well, and others are really challenged more than ever before. There is even people who find it easier to manage with like less social stress, all the things that I could do or where I would have to be. So it really depends. However, what I said before as well is like that often, especially queer refugees, cannot rely on the systems or established systems on family or community that other people might be able to rely on in a situation like a pandemic situation. And a lot of our clients are somewhat isolated in refugee camps, in situations where if on top of that community spaces, safe spaces that often are clubs and bars also fall away, that the isolation can really grow to a peak that becomes hard to handle. And the pandemic situation was also challenging in a sense that a lot of the offers and NGO offers also had to be closed, or the hurdles became bigger. For example, we were instructed to not really meet people or to meet people as little as possible and to do mostly on video counselling and all that. And we quickly had to realize it doesn't work. To even find trust to somebody that you see in a video screen, or you are in an asylum shelter where you might not even have the privacy to speak about such intimate issues into a camera. So for us it was mainly to always find creative ways to still be able to meet with people, be it outdoors, be it on camera where it's possible, but often we had to meet people in live settings. So I'm not a psychologist myself, so I wouldn't now really have any tips on like what an individual could do to deal with that extra level of stress in a better way. I think it would really depend on the individual. Maybe that's what comes to mind now.
Now we have another terrible situation at hand, which is the war in Ukraine. What are the most pressing challenges for you there and for your line of work?
Wow, yeah.
Another big question.
It's also a very big question, and that is a question because I think really we are all so stressed out at the moment too, like just as social workers and therapists and legal experts, because the situation is so highly dynamic and we don't really know, and that is of course especially hard for the refugees themselves who are in a state of confusion. The thing is now that legally it's not very clear when people can access what kind of help in what way. So the people coming from Ukraine at the moment are not encouraged to ask for asylum because they are applicable for another kind of humanitarian protection, which in theory sounds great, but from that to actually getting all the help that you need, medical attendance and shelter and food and all that, is very tricky. So for queer people coming from Ukraine, we have now a situation that we in a way know from other queer people coming to Berlin that has to do with this big hope or even conviction of being able to stay in Berlin. And that is a cause of a lot of heartache, because once people access the system, and most have to access the system because their material survival depends on it, then they get into this kind of machinery of being distributed to all over the country. And for many people that is a big problem, especially for queer people who then face being sent somewhere where there might not be much support, knowledge or empathy for the perspective of queers or refugees, or never mind queer refugees. So yeah, we're still in a phase of finding orientation and seeing what impact can we have and what can we contribute to affect people in a positive way and offer some sort of guidance and support. But it's mostly a big question mark. Still, we have translated our website into Ukrainian language, and a lot of the people from Ukraine speak Russian too, so we have the language skills to meet that, but yeah, we have to see where all of this goes.
So what you were mentioning is you have to register or be part of the system, amongst other things, to get access to healthcare. What special needs have queer refugees, healthcare-wise? I mean.
Yeah, I mean, of course, queer refugees have all the same medical needs everybody else has as well. And then there can be some special needs also, depending on the people. I mean, especially trans people come to mind. Not all of them, not all trans people want to, for example, undergo hormone therapy or even surgery, but many do, and for many it's an existential need to do that, and that also is a source of big frustration to many trans people who come to Germany as refugees, because already for, let's say, German-born trans people, it's so pathologizing, I don't know if that word exists in English, and it's so highly bureaucratic to get all these things, all these needs met, that, as we mentioned before, for refugees, with the extra language barrier, and also the asylum legislation doesn't allow people to access the full catalog of medical interventions right from the start, so it's such a long, stony road, like, to get to all these get all these needs met. But if people are lucky to be in a city like Berlin and to at least have access to NGOs like ourselves and others, there is some paths, and where we already have this network of empathetic and knowledgeable doctors, for example, where we can guide people into the structures to get ahead with those needs as good as possible. And of course, then also kind of STI and HIV treatment and counseling and all that, and to have access to that in a way that is not putting extra shame on people is a major subject too, and something that a city like Berlin can address pretty well, actually.
So you help people with all of these specific needs and services. Where are you located? How can people find you and gain access to these services?
Okay, Schwulenberatung has grown pretty big. All our services that are specifically addressing queer refugees are in Kreuzberg in Wilhelmstraße 115. Maybe you will can put a link to our website here in show notes, or however that is called. And there we have all our services for queer refugees in many different languages, where I think it's the easiest way for people to find some orientation themselves and see which one does apply to them, what could be interesting.
So we have a signature question that we ask all of our guests, and it is, what does giving back mean to you personally?
For me, what comes to mind is that I don't want to compare myself now to all the hardship that queer refugee has to go through to come to Germany and everything that entails. But one thing that I think is typical for queer people all over around the world is that we have always felt this pull to move to the big cities, like this hope to find a place where we could also be more anonymous and kind of find our individual build our individual lives and find the safe spaces and find the infrastructure that caters to us and our needs and all that. And I too come from a smallish town in Germany, and Berlin could offer me all that freedom and to just express myself and be who I am and not worry too much. And for me it's a great thing in social work, and especially the kind of work that I'm doing now, that I can a little bit contribute to people who have those challenges plus many more to also find their home here and just get permission to be who they are.
Thank you so much for sharing this and also giving us a bigger insight into the work of Schwulenberatung today.
Thank you.